Bienvenue pour l'autre session qui consiste, que ça là, c'est session Sénat là. Avec, comme on a toujours dit, Sénat c'est qui consiste, bien, qui parlement cette ici en deux façons. Avec, ça bien, départ l'année, côté, c'est maman qui électée, ça nous a créé Lower House, côté, c'est, il y a une session, chaque monde qui consiste. Avec Sénat là, c'est l'autre session qui c'est maman qui choisit ça, c'est face à le gouvernement, face à l'opposition et puis l'année indépendant. Avec Jodia, c'est Sénat là qui a une session. Nous en 8 heures quand même, puisque nous étions pour commencer à 10 heures, mais il semble accordé la tenue en raison, nous pouvons bien comprendre qui raison. Mais il semble tout à l'heure nous avons commencé. Mais vitement, Virgil, avant de commencer.
Yes, welcome again. We are about to commence this sitting of the Senate, the upper house, where there will be a discussion on the 3 motions that were discussed in the lower house on Tuesday. We will take you over to the live proceedings.
Let us pray. Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding, we thine unworthy servants here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of the blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the King, the public weal, peace, and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in the true Christian love and charity one towards another. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us all evermore. Amen. Madam Clerk, could you administer the oath to our senator, please? Thank you.
Okay. I, Didier Felician Shelton Daniel, do solemnly affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to St. Lucia, that I will uphold and defend the Constitution and the laws of St. Lucia, and I will conscientiously and impartially discharge my responsibilities to the people of St. Lucia. I do affirm.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Good morning, Senators. And we are having a late start this morning. For this, sincere apologies to all.
to indicate that I have received correspondence from the Speaker of the House of Assembly advising that the following motions were passed in the House of Assembly and forwarded to the Senate for its concurrence. Public Finance Management Act, Resolution of Parliament to establish the Regulated Substances Fund. Value Added Tax Act, Resolution of Parliament to approve draft Value Added Tax Amendment of Schedule 2, Order. Value Added Tax Act, Resolution of Parliament to approve draft Value Added Tax Amendment of Schedule 3, Number 2, Order. I beg to announce that His Excellency, the Acting Governor General, has been pleased to assent the Climate Change Bill. I have received an excuse from Senator Alison Jean, who is out of state and is therefore unable to attend today's sitting. We again extend best wishes to Senator Aziz in his recovery. Senator Stanislas has indicated that he's running late, and so we hope that he can get here in good time. Welcome, Senator Daniel. Announcements. Statements from ministers, statements from parliamentary secretary. Papers to be laid. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, colleagues. Madam President, I wish to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 33 of 2024, Price Control Amendment Number 5 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 34 of 2024, Excise Tax Amendment of Schedule 1 Number 5 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 35 of 2024, Public Finance Management Amendment Regulations. Statutory Instrument Number 34 of 2024, Motor Vehicle and Road Traffic Designation of Inspectors Order. Statutory Instrument Number 37 of 2024, Waste Management, Appointment of Agent for the Solid Waste Management Authority Notice. Statutory Instrument Number 38 of 2024, St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority, Seaport Tariff Amendment Regulations. Statutory Instrument Number 39 of 2024, Public Finance Management Act, Resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital or current expenditure, St. Lucia Sustainable Recovery Development Policy Financing. Statutory Instrument Number 40 of 2024, Public Finance Management Act, Resolution of Parliament to establish the Tourism Development Fund. Statutory Instrument Number 41 of 2024, Public Finance Management Act, Resolution of Parliament to authorize the Minister of Finance to guarantee borrowing by the National Lotteries Authority to finance a youth and sports infrastructure program. Statutory Instrument Number 42 of 2024, Public Finance Management, Public Asset Management Regulations. Statutory Instrument Number 43 of 2024, Legal Profession Eligibility, Aika Fenrica Dorival. Order. Statutory Instrument Number 44 of 2024, Legal Profession Eligibility, Meg Georgia Gibson Henlin. Order. Invest St. Lucia Annual Report 2022.
Motions. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I wish to lay the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is provided under Section 22(1) of the Public Finance Management Act, Cap 1501, the Act, that the Minister of Finance may, by an affirmative resolution of Parliament, establish a special fund to collect money that must be used for a specific purpose. And whereas it is further provided under Section 22(2) of the Act, that a resolution under subsection 1 must state A, the purpose of the fund, the special fund, B, the money to be paid into the special fund, C, the means of collection collecting money to be paid into the special fund. D, the source of the monies of the special fund. E, the accounting officer responsible for the administration of the special fund. F, the terms for which the special fund should be maintained. And whereas the Minister of Finance, with the approval of Parliament, considers it necessary to establish a special fund to be known as the Regulated Substances Fund, the fund, for the purpose of facilitating the operations of the Regulated Substances Authority. And whereas the source and monies to be paid into the fund comprises A, the sums allocated by Parliament, B, the grants received by the ministry responsible for commerce in relation to regulated substances, C, the fees charged under the Regulated Substances Act number 26 of 2023 or other enactment relating to regulated substances, D, any levy imposed under the Regulated Substances Act number 26 of 2023 or other enactment relating to regulated substances. E, all other sums that may become payable to or vested in the ministry responsible for commerce in respect of matters incidental to its powers and duties under the Regulated Substances Act number 26 of 2023 or other enactment relating to regulated substances. And whereas Section 23(1) of the Act relating to payment and accounting procedures applies to the fund. And whereas, in accordance with Section 23(2) and 3 of the Act, A, the accounting officer administering the fund shall, within a period of 1 month after the end of the financial year, prepare, sign, and submit to the Accountant General's statement showing the financial position of the fund at the end of the financial year. B, the statements under paragraph A must include 1, a statement of the assets and liabilities of the fund. 2, a detailed statement of receipts and payments of the fund. And 3, a statement of investments in and interest or dividends credited to the fund. And whereas the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry responsible for Commerce is the accounting officer who is responsible for administering the fund. And whereas the fund must be maintained unless it is closed by the Minister of Finance under Section 24 of the Act, where the Minister of Finance receives a report from the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry responsible for Commerce to indicate that the purpose for which the fund was established has been fulfilled or no longer exists, in the opinion of the Minister. There is no likelihood that a purpose for which the fund could lawfully be used will arise in future, or the terms specified in the regulations for the fund has expired. Be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to establish a special fund to be known as the Regulated Substances Fund for the purpose of facilitating the operations of the Regulated Substances Authority. Be it further resolved, A, that sources and monies to be paid into the fund comprises 1, the sums allocated by Parliament, 2, the grants received by the ministry responsible for commerce in relation to regulated substances, 3, the fees charged under the Regulated Substances Act number 26 of 2023 or another enactment relating to regulated substances, 4, any levy imposed under the Regulated Substances Act number 26 of 2023 or other enactment relating to regulated substances, 5, all other sums that may be payable to or vested in the ministry responsible for commerce in respect of matters incidental to its powers and duties under the Regulated Substances Act number 26 of 2023 or other enactment relating to the regulated substances. B, in accordance with Section 23(2) and 3 of the Act, 1, the accounting officer administering the fund shall, within a period of 1 month after the end of the financial year, prepare, sign, and submit to the Accountant General statements showing the financial position of the fund at the end of the financial year. 2. The statements under the subparagraph 1 must include A, a statement of the assets and liabilities of the fund, B, a detailed statement of receipts and payments of the fund, and C, a statement of investments and interest or dividends credited to the fund. C. Section 23(1) of the Act relating to the payment and accounting procedures applies to the fund. D. The Permanent Secretary of the Ministry responsible for Commerce is the accounting officer who is responsible for administering the fund. E. The fund must be maintained unless 1. It is closed by the Minister of Finance under Section 24 of the Act, where the Minister of Finance receives a report from the Permanent Secretary of the Department of Finance to indicate that the purpose for which the fund was established has been fulfilled or no longer exists, and in the opinion of the Minister, there is no likelihood that the purpose for which the fund could lawfully be used will arise in the future, or 2, the terms specified in this resolution for the fund has expired. Madam President, in addition to the elaborate, detailed information that has been provided in the resolution itself, in the body of the resolution, I wish to add a few more pertinent details and explanations within the context of this resolution. First of all, Madam President, this piece of legislation, which was enacted last year in November, to be more precise, 24th November of 2023, was known as the Regulated Substances Act number 26 of 2023. This act, Madam President, serves as a mechanism to strengthen our regulatory structures that guide the Regulated Substances Act. And as provided in Part 4, the Act required that there be a Regulated Substances Fund. So this is what we are coming to do. This is to follow up on one of the actions that have been required or stipulated by the Act that was passed last year. There are several sections that were mentioned in the resolution that I just read. As for example, under Section 76, it gives clear guidelines as to how the fund must be managed, and that will be done through a separate authority or board. Madam President, under Section 79, it outlines who these people are, and it gives examples, and I'll just mention a few of them, or well, who they are, not a few of them, but who they are. The Permanent Secretary of the Ministry responsible for Commerce will be the chairperson of that board. The Director of Finance will also be a member. The Chief Executive Officer of the Regulated Substances Authority will be a member. There will be one private sector individual or someone from the private sector, but that person would have to have expertise in the area of finance, economics, or any other related field. Madam President, why was the board established, or the board had to be established? It was to be able to manage the monies that are coming into the fund and to ensure that there is proper oversight. What are the examples, or what would these funds be used for? And of course, I think it is appropriate to give some examples. The monies will be used for a number of purposes. I will outline some of them later, but before I do so, where will the monies be coming from that we expect to go into the fund? As mentioned in the resolution, but I will highlight again, these monies will come from various sources, such as sums allocated by the Parliament, grants that are received by the Ministry of Commerce, that's the said ministry, in relation to regulated substances, fees that are charged under the Act, or other related enacted legislation, any levy that is imposed under the Act, There's also, well, not only under the Act, but any other related legislation, or any sums that are payable or vested in the ministry with respect to matters incidental to its powers. So there is a clear outline procedure as per who manages, where monies are going to come from. And in addition, Madam President, if we look at Section 77, it explains the purpose for the fund. What is the fund being established to do? Two main purposes. One, Madam President, is to facilitate the operations of the Regulated Substances Authority, and the other main purpose, notwithstanding subsection 1, is that Cabinet may declare that the monies of the fund be used for specified matters related to regulated substances. Madam President, who will benefit from those funds when they have been collected? There are several sectors that stand to benefit. And just to mention these sectors, Madam President, healthcare is one, manufacturing, agriculture, security and commerce. These will all benefit from these funds. And under these various departments, there are several activities that will benefit from this fund, because some of these departments undertake some of these activities. And just to name a few, Madam President, you have scientific research and development, public health education, which is so critical now, particularly when it comes to people who are using regulated substances. Madam President, you would recall that we recently, not recently, but one of our first bits of legislation upon assuming office was the cannabis decriminalizing of the use of cannabis and for particular purposes. And what we know is that if it becomes legal for someone to use a regulated substance, then there must be certain guidelines, certain some information that people need to have, so that there is you basically regulate and also protect their interests. And part of the fund will be used for the public awareness and education in that regard. Madam President, and that would benefit the high-risk groups of persons who use those substances. It also would include activities such as emotional and mental support programs for people who may have been a little irresponsible in what they have been using and need rehabilitation and need help. And we know these institutions in St. Lucia that have been charged with those responsibilities would obviously need some support. Madam President, just by way of further examples, the Minister of Commerce is the minister under whose portfolio that would be assigned. And there would have to be some measure of control or regulation when it comes to the deciding on a selling or retail price for these regulated substances. So there has to be a method by which that is determined, because if not, you're going to have chaos. Madam President, in addition, the Act provides for the legislative framework for prudent, and I repeat prudent, informed and inclusive management of the fund. You see, anytime, Madam President, you establish a fund in the government, any government department, it is considered money that you are responsible for, that belongs to the state. And therefore, there must be established protocols, established processes to guide the way these monies are used. And therefore, if in that case it comes under the Ministry of Commerce, the legislative framework must exist to make sure that it is guided. So, Madam President, with these further details, I really do welcome the establishment on the fund as required by the Act that we had passed last year, and I ask that this chamber gives the full support to this resolution. Thank you.
Senators, the question is that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to establish a special fund to be known as the Regulated Substances Fund for the purpose of facilitating the operations of the Regulated Substances Authority. Be it further resolved that A, the source and monies to be paid into the fund comprises 1, the sums allocated by Parliament; 2, the grants received by the ministry responsible for commerce in relation to regulated substances; 3, the fees charged under the Regulated Substances Act number 26 of 2023 or another enactment relating to the regulated substances; 4, any levy imposed under the Regulated Substances Act number 26 of 2023 or another enactment relating to regulated substances; 5, all other sums that may become payable to or vested in the ministry responsible for commerce in respect of matters incidental to its powers and duties under the Regulated Substances Act number 26 of 2023 or another enactment relating to regulated substances. B, in accordance with section 23(2) and 3 of the Act. 1, the accounting officer administering the fund shall, within a period of 1 month after the end of the financial year, prepare, sign, and submit to the Accountant General statements showing the financial position of the fund at the end of the financial year. 2, the statements under subparagraph 1 must include A, a statement of the assets and liabilities of the fund; B, a detailed statement of receipts and payments of the fund; and C, a statement of investments and interest or dividends credited to the fund. C, section 23(1) of the Act relating to the payment and accounting procedures applies to the fund. D, the permanent secretary of the ministry responsible for commerce is the accounting officer who is responsible for administering the fund. E, the fund must be maintained unless 1, it is closed by the Minister for Finance under section 24 of the Act, where the Minister for Finance receives a report from the Permanent Secretary of the Department of Finance to indicate that the purpose for which the fund was established has been fulfilled or no longer exists, and, in the opinion of the Minister, there is no likelihood that a purpose for which the fund could lawfully be used will arise in the future. Or 2, the terms specified in the resolution for the fund has expired. Senator Paulius.
Madam President, thank you, and I just want to wish everyone a wonderful day today. Madam President, I stand in this honorable chamber today to make my submission on the resolution to authorize the Minister of Finance to establish a special fund known as the Regulated Substances Fund. Madam President, while some might view this piece of legislation as straightforward, I must express one main reservation about this resolution or about this proposal. In my view, Madam President, this is far from being a simple matter. Madam President, this piece of legislation raises one major concern, and it is a critical issue, an issue regarding the transparency of our financial system, our reporting system. And so I just want to draw the attention of our members to page 3 and paragraph B of the document. Just let me get it, Madam President. And it reads, be it further resolved that in accordance with section 23A and 3 of the Act, B1, the accounting officer administering the fund shall, within a period of 1 month after the end of the financial year, prepare, sign, and submit to the Accountant General statements showing the financial position of the fund at the end of the financial year. I want us now, Madam President, to segue to page 4, and I think it's paragraph D. And it reads, the permanent secretary of the ministry responsible for commerce is the accounting officer who is responsible for administering the fund. Madam President, from my vantage point, this is not straightforward, and by no means a simple matter. Madam President, I am concerned about this practice where the accounting officer who manages the funds is the same person who prepares, signs, and submits the financial statement. Doesn't it create a conflict of interest and raise doubts about the integrity of our financial reporting? Perhaps the leader of government business might want to provide some clarification. But I'm asking the question, and I need clarity here, Madam President. Can we really trust the financial statements, that those financial statements are accurate and unbiased under such arrangement? Can we? And if we can, Madam President, I would like the leader of government business to provide the clarity that is needed. And I ask the question, Madam President, what is the role of the government's audit department in this process? Shouldn't they be responsible for preparing the financial statements to ensure objectivity and accuracy? Inquiry minds want to know, Madam President. Allowing the same person to administer, to manage, and to audit the funds, Madam President, isn't this like letting the fox guard the chicken coop? Isn't it? And if it's not, we are asking for clarity, Madam President. And are we not compromising the very same principles of accountability and transparency that we aim to uphold, particularly where public funds are concerned in this country? Madam President, this is a concern that needs to be addressed. We want to ensure that we protect the integrity system. We must ensure that separating the roles of administering and auditing the fund, we are able to protect this financial reporting system. This is what we need to be able to do. And in the absence of such measures, Madam President, you know what happens? We run the risk of jeopardizing public trust in our financial management. And more importantly, we run the risk of opening the door to potential corruption and mismanagement of public funds. Without the necessary oversight and accountability that is needed, Madam President, the very same purpose of establishing the Regulated Substances Fund, that could be undermined. And we would fail in our duty to serve the interests of the people of this country. Madam President, with this, I thank you, and this is my submission on this resolution.
Senator Daniel.
Thank you very much, Madam President. My contribution here does not need to be lengthy at all, and it won't be. But I think when I listen to Senator Dr. Polius, that there seems to be a little bit of confusion, if not of nomenclature, but of the rules. A permanent secretary is always the chief accounting officer in a ministry. And maybe, I'm trying not to avoid sounding condescending, please. There is a difference between an accounting officer and an accountant. The accountant in any ministry, whether it be the senior accountant, the principal assistant accountant, whatever the terminology is, they, like every other staffer in a ministry, are subject to and beholden to the permanent secretary. It does not mean that the permanent secretary is the one who is going to essentially line by line perform the technical functions of preparing the statement of accounts. The permanent secretary has the power to delegate duties and responsibilities to everybody within the ministry, including the accounting staff of the ministry, that is the accountants, the technical people, and to say to them, do this, do that, I want that information in that report. But at the end of the day, there is somebody who has to take responsibility for the preparation, for the collating, for the verification, and the signing off on this report before it is transmitted. And so the permanent secretary in the ministry that is responsible for commerce takes responsibility for administering the fund, and having done so, that permanent secretary, as the chief accounting officer, it says, administering the fund, shall within a period of 1 month after the end of the financial year, and if the financial year ends on the 31st of March in any given year, I think they're basically saying that by the end of April, you should have that report collated, and the permanent secretary should be able to sign off on it, so that any mistakes that the accounting staff made, the permanent secretary has now to take responsibility, because it is given under your hand, even though the technical errors were made by people, who are subject to you. And then to transmit it to the accountant general. So there isn't any case of the very same person who is the functionary being the gatekeeper. There isn't any terror about there not being a separation of powers and checks and balances. The permanent secretary, as chief accounting officer, drawing upon the technical resources of the accounting staff, prepares the report and submits it to somebody who has oversight, supposed to have an eagle eye over all the financial transactions and statements of the government, aptly called the accountant general. And the Accountant General's Department, in normal parlance, we refer to it as the Treasury. That is the person who's in charge of our treasury. And that accountant general has oversight over even more accountants and financial managers and people who will do audit. That is why I also believe there is a little misunderstanding about the role of the director of audit. The director of audit is someone who, and the report is supposed to come at the end of every year, financial year, who does a general review of all government accounts, including the accounts of the accountant general. So the person who has the revision oversight to check up, to go back and to do, as the name suggests, is audits. You do your internal audits within the ministry, but the director of audit, sometimes referred to as the auditor general, director of audit, now at the end of a certain period, whether it is a year, goes and takes a look and says, okay, what the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Commerce did and submitted to the accountant general, the accountant general seems to have accepted it. The accountant general seems to have said, I'm okay with what the PS Commerce submitted, but I am seeing that there is a problem as director of audit, in that there is a flaw in what the PS submitted to the director, to the accountant general, and the accountant general, based upon not seeing that flaw, which I, as the director of audit, and my staff, because we tend to believe people act all by themselves, they just do things so. The director of audit has staff. The director of audit has subordinate staff, accountants, other auditors, other people who do the checking and the forensics and so on the account, that the director of audit can now find if there was a problem in the process, if there was a problem in the application, if there was a problem in the transmission, in the conveying, which led to some error or something being picked up, to ask questions. The director of audit can say, this report is incomplete, it is lacking some of the basics of what you would refer from financial statements and financial reporting, and so I am unable to sign off and to say it is okay. That is the general review function of the director of audit, who we might say is a super accountant, somebody who accounts, holds the accountants to account, including the chief accounting officer. So I just wanted to see that I think Senator Polis's concerns about the possibility for, things not being straight. Was that? Okay. And then things, not being done as they should be, and questions being raised about them, that they're legitimate and they're genuine questions. But I believe as things now stand, the processes that are in place now provide sufficient separation between functionary and gatekeeper. The checks and balances between who is presenting the report, who is receiving the report, who is reviewing the report, when the report is laid in the parliament and so on, all those things can come, and the director of audit has the power and the responsibility to take a second, we might say, a final look at those things. And we have what is supposed to be an annual report by the director of audit, pointing out any discrepancies in those things. And I think over the years, we can say that our directors of audit have done a pretty remarkable job, and they have been impartial. Our directors of audit have been the watchers and the scrutinizers and the people who have watched what is going on. And their reports, most of us don't read it. We don't bother, because a lot of times they're out of date, and simply because directors of audit will tell you they don't receive the reports at the time that they should receive them. So their annual reports do not reflect the things that happen. Sometimes audit reports are years late, and directors of audit will always tell you it is because the information which they have been asking for. I remember one year a director of audit came out and said, there are certain things I have for so long been asking for, and I can't get it. You understand? Director of audit will not go and fight with somebody, but when they do get the information, they measure it up against what was presented, what was transacted, and they come to conclusions. And a director of audit, there's a reason why a director of audit is very constitutionally protected, A director of audit and a director of public prosecution, they enjoy a level of constitutional protection that can't touch this, Nobody can interfere with them. People can't arbitrarily fire them. Nobody can discipline them, suspend them. There is a very involved constitutional process if you have to interfere or review or alter the work of a director of audit. So there is a lot of power and independence and authority that the director of audit has, which in St. Lucia, I believe they have generally wielded well. A lot of times governments, regardless of the color, have not particularly liked them, have not particularly liked the reports and the things that they have had to say in the report, but their work that they have done. Therefore, I want to say that where we are concerned in St. Lucia about a possible little leakage or gateway or little crack being there that can allow corruption to thrive because the very same person who's presenting the report is reviewing it. Not really true. The person who's preparing the report or gathering the report and signing off, the permanent secretary is passing it on to another gatekeeper called the Accountant General. At the end of the day, both Accountant General and PS Commerce, they are subject to the review of the Director of Audit, not to mention, I think, the scrutiny and the oversight of the Parliament when those reports are laid there. Because there are some people who actually take it serious enough, Director of Audit's report and all those things, to study them, to read them, and to come into this chamber and the chamber below to make their presentations and their observations. Madam President, with this a little longer than I intended intervention, I want to say thank you very much.
Senator Fede.
Thank you, Madam President. Just a brief submission on this motion before us here today. Madam President, we are here to seek the approval of the Senate to establish a regulated substance fund. One of the substances, Madam President, no doubt that this fund will seek to collect monies and levies and different fees that will be charged. One of the most anticipated substances is indeed cannabis. Madam President, I would recall with much enthusiasm that the St. Lucia Labour Party, while in opposition, campaigned very staunchly and aggressively that they would come to the House and they would ensure that the cannabis industry was going to play a vital part in the advancement of our economy. That is notwithstanding, Madam President, that the cabinet which I was a part of would have established a draft piece of legislation already, would have already made the recommendation, done the consultation with various agencies so that we can arrive at an informed position. I think that the two parties pretty much align in their thinking that the cannabis industry can play a role in the economic development of St. Lucia. That is not my concern. My concern is there seems to be a slowing down of the SLP's enthusiasm, and it is worth me raising the question to leader of government business that why is the government taking so long, having campaigned with so much vigor and vitality during the elections campaign. There are people in certain quarters that might be asking the question as to whether you've changed your mind and as to whether today's exercise is just a token exercise. But what are the next steps? I think it brings to mind what is the timeline for the completion of the regulatory, of completing the regulatory environment. Because without completing this, what this has allowed is for the uncontrolled use to prevail of substances such as cannabis. Madam President, I know that based on your background, that you would know very well the significant role that chronic diseases like COPD is contributing towards the death rate in St. Lucia and the loss of life. So the quicker that we can have a regulatory
Madam President,
environment.
on a point of elucidation.
Point of elucidation. Are you yielding, Senator? Okay. Senator?
The leader of opposition business did suggest that the Labour Party is delaying in allowing for some sort of control over the use of cannabis and began to talk about, what could potentially happen. But that is what the SLP did within the first 100 days. Somebody would have been able to carry up to 15 grams on their person, and it was increased to 30 grams. So there is control as we speak. So just to inform the senator that there is control and it is illegal to carry more than 30 grams of cannabis on your person.
Senator Fede.
I thank the senator for her intervention, Madam President, but she has raised a very interesting point, that while we have said to the users of cannabis that you can carry a limited amount for personal use, we have not made it possible for people to grow cannabis in St. Lucia. So there can be no cultivation. So you have clearly outlined the confusion and the mismanagement with which you do things in this country. Because the point is, someone can use cannabis, but it is not legal for them to cultivate cannabis, and it is not legal for them to import cannabis. So if they're not cultivating it, and if they're not importing cannabis, how can they have cannabis? So that is...
Madam President, on a point of order, you are permitted...
What is your point of order, Senator?
Thank you, Madam. You are permitted to cultivate a certain number of plants. If the member opposite is asking for the government of St. Lucia to completely allow for the full decriminalization and no regulation, absolutely no regulation on cannabis in 2 years, if that is what the United Workers' Party is proposing, then maybe he needs to be clear on his position. But 2.5 years, we've achieved so much more as it relates to getting to a point of getting closer to regulating cannabis. So yes, you can plant up to a certain number of plants. Yes, it is decriminalized up to 30 grams, and the process continues as we've been made aware. But I don't think it is right for us to mislead and attempt to mislead the public or people watching to suggest that, you know, we need to do all of this right now, or this government is going to do it right now. There's a process.
Senator Fede.
Thank you, Madam President, and I thank the senator for her intervention. You see how generous I am. I'm yielding to. Now, Madam President, if you are going to implement something as crucial as this, it is important that you take the steps, and the timing of the steps are done well. We are faced with a situation in this country where legislation suggests that you can grow up to a certain amount of plants. I need to see that. I know we said for personal use. I've never seen anything about growing for the plants. As far as I am aware, it is illegal to import cannabis, and it is illegal to cultivate cannabis. So what you've got to do, that if you're going to make it legal for people to use it, then you've got to ensure that there is a legal framework available for them to be able to access it. And if they are not able to access it, then what will happen is you're going to cause confusion by implementing certain aspects of the whole process, because this is a complete process that has far-reaching implications for many aspects of your law. So it affects your narcotics law. You've just come here today to establish a fund. So it tells us that the process is not complete, and the government has to properly evaluate the different stages and how it is going to affect the community. If you pass a law to say that you are going to, you can have a certain amount of grams for personal use, and the regulatory environment is not complete, then you create chaos. How are you going to regulate that? How are you going to manage the whole process? Right now, we are leaving it to the discretion of individuals to say, well, whether I have 10 grams, 8 grams, or 20 grams, and unless I'm caught by the police, then there is a certain element of the law which makes it legal for me to have within my person or to consume cannabis. So I think what I'm saying here, I'm not saying that I disagree with the government to go into this area. I'm just saying that these steps need to be taken in a very orderly fashion, and I think the government has to be more strategic in how they implement this, because if we don't do these steps right, we can expose a number of people to a lot of hazardous use. I know that being someone in community, I know that a number of people are mixing cannabis with all kinds of different substances. And that is because one of the things that contributes to this is the fact that there is a lack of what the market requires right now. There seems to be a lack of access and the availability of it, because you can't, for example, import it. People are still traversing our different coast, carrying and importing cannabis illegally. And so if you're going to now make this legal, it is important that you do this in a fashion that is going to be timely and that is going to work in the various steps, so that you don't expose the users of cannabis to the health hazards that are clearly associated with this. Now, another Caribbean country, Sister Island, Jamaica, they have indicated that since the decriminalization of their narcotics laws and making cannabis more accessible, they have seen an increase in substance abuse. And one of the things that we need to learn from is to make sure that as we go into this phase, there needs to be a lot more proactive education that needs to happen even before we open the floodgates. So it could be dangerous that if the government does not do the necessary health education, if the government does not prepare the population well in advance as to how to behave in this new environment of the new freedom that the country can have, then there is danger on the horizon. So this has to be done well, the same level of gusto, the same level of vigor and valor that the Labour Party and their various political platforms campaigned for this issue to be done. I think that there is a lot of work to be done. I welcome the establishment of the fund, Madam President. This is a step closer towards achieving that regulatory environment. It's a step closer to completing it. But before we get to the stage where now it becomes legal for people to import cannabis, or it becomes legal for people to cultivate cannabis commercially, and the access that that's going to bring to a number of citizens, there is a lot more public education that needs to be done in advance. So I await, Madam President, to see a big island-wide public education campaign that is very balanced, to say to the people of St. Lucia, yes, this is a freedom that you may enjoy, but they are a risk, and this is how you should use it, and what are this is not for everybody. If you don't use this properly, there are going to be some dangers. That's all I'm saying. Madam President, I thank you very much.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President, and I do thank my three colleagues who have contributed to the motion for their observations. I want to start by making a point regarding the contribution of the Leader of Opposition Business, Senator Fede. When he started, I was listening to the tangent that he took, and I thought that for a while there was quite a lot said on the cannabis issue, almost giving us a high on the discussion. So I thank him. I think the tone also suggested that the whole chamber, but thankfully I don't think we did. Madam President, it is important that we note, while the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party has not achieved all of its objectives with regard to that particular cannabis issue, we have done in our tenure more than anyone else would have done, despite all the talk that was held, all the discussion with ICA, the Rastafarians, and everybody with regard to cannabis. So I just want to lay the senator's fears, allay his fears, and tell the St. Lucian public that in our tenure, there are 3 major steps that we have taken. And while he was trying to ask, well, what are y'all doing? You know, he finally, towards the end of his contribution, finally stated the fact that what we are doing here today is a step in the direction to achieve what we came to achieve. So I give him credit for acknowledging that. Madam President, the 3 major steps that we've taken as a government. 1, within the first 100 days, we came into this parliament and we decriminalized 30 grams. And now people can grow up to 4 plants in their backyard. That was step 1. Madam President, we recognize that once you are going to decriminalize or you're going to move in that direction, you have to regulate things. And so we came back in October and we passed the Regulated Substances Act. And today, Madam President, in April of 2024, we are saying part of the act, we are fulfilling the requirements of the act, is that we establish a regulated substances fund. That's what we are here to do today. So notice the progression, but the meticulous effort we are making to ensure that we do things right. So, Madam President, the point that he made about making sure, and he's correct about people mixing marijuana with other substances, that is one of the main problems we have with COPD in this country. And that is why, Madam President, in my deliberations earlier, I made mention of one of the things that the fund is going to be used for. Rehabilitation, I said that. And also want to remind the Chamber that the public education campaign that the Senator mentioned quite correctly, these words were uttered when I made the presentation. Part of the fund will be directed towards public education campaign. We continue to do that, and we realize that it has a cost attached to it. So instead of just leaving it to come from the government's general coffers, we are directing the fund, some of the funding towards that effort. So let me reassure everyone that with regard to the Leader of Opposition's concerns, we are well on the way, and I thank him for reminding everybody that we are moving in that direction. Now, as far as how quickly we move, I'm not sure that unless we are high, we're not going to be able to move any faster than that. So we want to be sane, we want to be sober, and we want to do things properly. Now, Madam President, I want to briefly respond to some of the observations made by Senator Polius. Senator Polius raised the issue of public accountability in a nutshell, and had concerns about the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Commerce being a chief administrator of the fund and also the chief accounting officer. Madam President, this is a very serious position to take, because I want to remind this chamber, and I wish Senator Jean was here because she's a former permanent secretary. I'm sure she would have treated that very well. But I want to remind this chamber that in this country, the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party does not try to preclude, diminish, or interfere with the responsibilities of senior public servants. By law, the permanent secretary is the chief accounting officer of their ministry. That is the law. And I think Senator Daniel gave a very good explanation about the processes, the role of the accountant general, the role of the director of audit. Those senior public servants have independent roles that are protected by law. And to come here, I was a little disappointed to suggest that not a politician, people have their things, they say whatever they want about us, we're politicians. See, politicians may be dishonest, so when they have a hand in things, people get suspicious. But to raise that level of suspicion about a permanent secretary's role, the permanent secretary is the one responsible for making those decisions. And that is why the permanent secretary is the chairperson of the board. And the permanent secretary, she's saying she has authority. I am providing that, Madam President. And so the permanent secretary is the chief accounting officer in whatever ministry that they serve. Sometimes when we refer to our PS in tourism, we say she's the boss because she's the chief accounting officer. And we're not trying to make our permanent secretaries politicians. They're not. When they have their job to do, we allow them to do their job. So that is the role of the permanent secretary. And this resolution is aligned with that particular rule, respects and recognizes the rule, and he's designated that as required by the law. Madam President, while I was listening, I realized who was speaking. I realized it's the opposition United Workers' Party that appointed the 3 senators. And then I said, oh, now I understand why my colleague is so suspicious and is so concerned about the senior public servants. Madam President, from my studies in education, and I know Senator Polius will know that because she's a colleague educator. So I chose a specific phrase that I think will aptly address her concern and will make it very clear why I think she was concerned. There's a famous French philosopher named René Descartes. I'm sure she would have come across him in her studies. And he has a famous term he uses. In French it would be je pense donc je suis, meaning I think therefore I am. So I am just ending this argument with one statement. Why is the opposition thinking that there is any issue that can come up to question what the senior public officer would do? Is that why, Madam President, our budget that had been prepared by our senior public officers, if they found a reason to allow another entity, I wish not to name, or maybe I can, because it has been mentioned many times here, Ernst & Young, is it? To do this particular job. Madam President, is that a demonstration in the lack of confidence of this opposition in our public officers? Is it? So it's raising its head again. So I understand the context that the senator, while I respect the fact that she has a right to raise concerns, I respect that and I think she should. But within that context, because it involves permanent secretary, senior public officer, I see it very aligned with their philosophy, with their modus operandi. So, I think, therefore, I am. Madam President, I thank you.
Senators, the question is that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to establish a special fund to be known as the Regulated Substances Fund for the purpose of facilitating the operations of the Regulated Substances Authority. Be it further resolved that A, the source and monies to be paid into the fund comprises 1, the sums allocated by Parliament, 2, the grants received by the ministry responsible for commerce in relation to the regulated substances, 3, the fees charged under the Regulated Substances Act number 26 of 2023 or another enactment relating to the regulated substances, 4, any levy imposed under the Regulated Substances Act number 26 of 2023 or another enactment relating to regulated substances. 5, all other sums that may be comparable to or vested in the ministry responsible for commerce in respect of matters incidental to its powers and duties under the Regulated Substances Act number 26 of 2023 or another enactment relating to regulated substances. B, in accordance with section 23(2) and 3 of the Act. 1, The accounting officer administering the fund shall, within a period of 1 month after the end of the financial year, prepare, sign, and submit to the Accountant General statements showing the financial position of the fund at the end of the financial year. 2. The statements under subparagraph 1 must include A. A statement of the assets and liabilities of the fund. B. A detailed statement of receipts and payments of the fund. And C. A statement of investments and interest or dividends credited to the fund. C. Section 23(1) of the Act relating to the payment and accounting procedures applies to the fund. D. The permanent secretary of the ministry responsible for commerce is the accounting officer who is responsible for administering the fund. E. The fund must be maintained unless 1. It is closed by the Minister for Finance under Section 24 of the Act, where the Minister for Finance receives a report from the Permanent Secretary of the Department of Finance to indicate that the purpose for which the fund was established has been fulfilled or no longer exists, and, in the opinion of the Minister, there is no likelihood that a purpose for which the fund could lawfully be used will arise in the future, or the term specified in the resolution for the fund has expired. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I beg to lay the following motion standing in my name. Whereas under Section 109(1)(a) of the Value Added Tax Act, Cap 1542, the Act, it is provided for the Minister of Finance that the Minister of Finance may, by order published in the Gazette, amend the schedules to the Act. And whereas it is provided under Section 109(2) of the Act that an order made pursuant to Section 109(1) of the Act is subject to an affirmative resolution of Parliament, except where the amendment is to the customs tariff headings only. And whereas the Minister of Finance seeks approval of the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 2, order to amend Schedule 2 of the Act by an affirmative resolution of Parliament. A. In item 1, to include the following definitions. Cricket West Indies means the Cricket West Indies Inc., a company incorporated under the laws of the British Virgin Islands. International Business Corporation means ICC Business Corporations, FZ LLC, a company incorporated under the regulations of the Dubai Development Authority. International Cricket Council means International Cricket Council, a company limited by guarantee and incorporated in the British Virgin Islands. B. In item 2, to include as an exempt supply for a period commencing the 1st day of April of 2024 and ending on the 31st day of July of 2024, supply to the Cricket West Indies and the International Cricket Council, its subsidiaries and associates, including the International Business Corporation, for Cricket World Cup 2024 of the following goods and services. 1. Supply of stationery. 2. Supply of signage. 3. Supply of promotional materials, including flyers and clothing. 4. The supply of transportation of cargo. 5. Supply of routers and walkie-talkies. 6. Supply of printing supplies. 7. A supply of hardware and building supplies. 8. A supply of accommodation. 9. A supply of telecommunication services. 10. A supply of laundry services. 11. a supply of cleaning services. 12, a supply of catering services. 13, a supply of security services. Be it resolved that Parliament, by affirmative resolution, approves the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 2, in which the amendments of which amends Schedule 2 of the Act. A, in Item 1, to include the following new definitions. Cricket West Indies means Cricket West Indies Inc., a company incorporated under the laws of the British Virgin Islands. International Cricket Council means the International Cricket Council, a company limited by guarantee and incorporated in the British Virgin Islands. International Business Corporation means ICC Business Corporation, FZ LLC, a company incorporated under the regulations of the Dubai Development Authority. B, to include as an exempt supply for a period commencing from the 1st day of April 2024 and ending on the 31st day of July 2024, a supply to Cricket West Indies and International Cricket Council, its subsidiaries and associates, including the International Business Corporation for Cricket World Cup 2024, of the following goods and services. 1, a supply of stationery. 2, a supply of signage. 3, a supply of promotional materials, including flyers and clothing. 4, a supply of local transportation of cargo. 5, a supply of routers and walkie-talkies. 6, a supply of printing materials, printing supplies. 7, a supply of hardware and building supplies. 8, a supply of accommodation. 9, a supply of telecommunication services. 10, a supply of laundry services. 11, a supply of cleaning services. 12, a supply of catering services. And 13, a supply of security services. Madam President, we were here recently when we had discussion on the ICC World Cup being hosted by the Caribbean this year, St. Lucia being one of the host territories. We're very happy that this is so. This amendment is really to facilitate the exemption of VAT on goods and services that relate to the ICC World Cup, and those stated entities who may be providing these services and may have use for these goods to be brought in can then receive those exemptions under the VAT Act. And so, Madam President, for that to happen, it would then mean that the course of action to be taken is what we're doing, and Parliament to be able to authorize that particular change. So I think that we all look forward to the benefits of the ICC World Cup to St. Lucia starting in June, and hopefully that will facilitate that particular activity for the benefit of all of us. So I ask that the Senate gives its support to that particular amendment.
Senator Fede.
Thank you, Madam President.
She has to request.
My apologies. You seem to already. No, it was my error. Yes, Senators, the question is that Parliament, by affirmative resolution, approve the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 2 order, which amends Schedule 2 of the Act. A, in Item 1 to include the following new definitions. Cricket West Indies means Cricket West Indies Inc., a company incorporated under the laws of the British Virgin Islands. International Cricket Council means the International Cricket Council, a company limited by guarantee and incorporated in the British Virgin Islands. International Business Corporation means ICC Business Corporation, FC, LLC, a company incorporated under the regulations of the Dubai Development Authority. B, to include as an exempt supply for a period commencing from the 1st day of April 2024 and ending on the 31st day of July 2024, a supply to Cricket West Indies and the International Cricket Council, its subsidiaries and associates, including the International Business Cooperation for Cricket World Cup 2024, of the following goods and services. 1, a supply of stationery. 2, a supply of signage. 3, supply of promotional materials including flyers and clothing. 4, a supply of local transportation of cargo. 5, a supply of routers and walkie-talkies. 6, a supply of printing supplies. 7, a supply of hardware and building supplies. 8, a supply of accommodation. 9, a supply of telecommunication services. 10, a supply of laundry services. 11, a supply of cleaning services. 12, a supply of catering services. 13, a supply of security services. Senator Fede.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, St. Lucia is hosting 6 games. There's Australia versus Scotland. There's Sri Lanka versus the Netherlands. There's West Indies versus Afghanistan. And in the Super 8 segment of the World Cup, Madam President, it depends on which teams qualify for this round. So we have Group B, for the lead in Group B will play the second team in Group C. Then the lead in Group B will also play in St. Lucia, the first team in Group D. And then the second team in Group B will play the first team in Group A. So what we have and what we know for sure is Australia versus Scotland, Sri Lanka versus the Netherlands, and the West Indies versus Afghanistan. I recall, Madam President, that when St. Lucia had joined forces with Barbados to host the 2007 World Cup, albeit a different format, it was a 50 over, and this is a T20. The objective then, by the then Labour Party administration, was that the St. Lucia government would be in very good stead if they were able to attract an England game, and if we were able to have the English team playing, or the English group playing in St. Lucia as a host venue. Because, Madam President, there was a premium for tourism leveraging that was placed on that group. Madam President, it then leaves me to wonder what really happened in the bidding process this time. How do we end up with Scotland and the Netherlands and Afghanistan? All of these games, Madam President, are not trump card games. The price tag is left to be known. We don't know how much the government is spending on the World Cup. We have $80 million that was borrowed for the establishment of the practice facilities for the games. But we don't know what is the total price tag. And so we know that at least we're spending $18 million to host the World Cup. And we're here today, Madam President, to get tax concessions for Cricket West Indies and its affiliate, the International Cricket Council. We support that. This is quite routine. This has been done before. We have come to this Parliament and we've asked for those concessions. We have hosted the CPL, and we understand that when they're bringing their television and they need to have some semblance of operation out of St. Lucia, that in order to reduce those costs, we need the exemptions that the government is seeking today. So, no argument from us in that regard. we don't have a problem with hosting World Cup. But what we want to know, how much is it costing us? 80 million in a previous sitting not so long ago for just the facilities, just to restore the Bosses U cricket ground, as well as the
Madam President, on a point of order 37-1, the member is not sticking to the motion at hand. And I would, through you, Madam, ask him to please get to the point.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Fede, I realize you're speaking cricket and organization, so I'll allow you a little latitude, but please, no, stick to it.
Thank you, Madam President. The motion before us is to waive VAT for the Cricket West Indies and its affiliate organization, the International Cricket Council. And this is to facilitate the hosting of the World Cup. Yeah, so I think that maybe in the language that is crafted, maybe the Senator is confused as to the purpose, as to why we're doing this. But why we're doing this, we're not just doing this for nothing. We're doing this to host the World Cup, of which the first match will be in St. Lucia on the 15th of June. So why we are coming here to get these various VAT waivers is actually for the hosting of the World Cup, right? Now, if I can just read the motion again. Cricket West Indies, it's a long motion, but I'm very, very clear as to what the leader of government business is saying. A supplier of stationery, a supplier of signage, promotional materials, flyers, local cargo and transportation, routers and walkie-talkies. Why would you need walkie-talkies and routers if you're not hosting an event? So it is for the World Cup that we're having. Laundry services, telecommunication services. I'm sure the government is doing this to host the World Cup. So now it becomes relevant as to how much we're spending on the World Cup. We're foregoing a lot of taxes here. We don't have a problem with that. Yeah? But what we do have a problem, what we do have questions around is this. 80 million in a previous sitting was borrowed to fix the practice facility, the Mindle Phillip Park, and to upgrade the Bosses U cricket ground. Now, I have sat in cabinet before, and I have seen the Ministry of Sports, they've come, and my colleague here has been in cabinet as well, and always they will come for a few $1 million, but 80 million is a lot of money. $80 million is an exorbitant sum to get. You're not building a new stadium. This is, you're just upgrading the stadium for the World Cup, and then you're establishing the outfield of the Mindle Phillip Park. Are you putting new stands there in the practice facility? I don't think that that's necessary. But $80 million is a lot of money to repair stadiums that already exist. So I just, through you, Madam President, just want to ask the government, how much is the hosting of the World Cup really costing us? Madam President, the hosting of cricket events like the World Cup have been used by various administrations to accomplish a number of developmental objectives. And while we support this motion today, we just have a number of questions relating to the event for which this motion is for. So, governments over the years would use this to upgrade national stadiums and practice facilities, of which I've just commented on. I remember when we hosted the 2007 World Cup. I was a little boy in Grosley, and I was so happy when they did the outfield, and I was like, great, finally we have a international playing field to play on. Madam President, within a year, the playing field was back to its old self. Bumpy outfield, no plumbing facilities, bad washrooms, no I'm just going to say to the government that if you're going to spend this type of money, do not allow the practice facility to then be reduced to what we have done historically. And we've hosted matches before, between the 2007 World Cup and now. And we've established and improved playing facilities, and they went back to their normal self. Madam President, the governments also consider tourism marketing and activities. But again, if you're spending $80 million plus, I don't know how much the government is going to spend in hotels, and I don't know the dollar value of the taxes that are being foregone in this motion here today. We're giving away a lot of VAT, and they're bringing in a lot of stuff. And so what is that dollar value? What is the taxpayers of this country paying to host the World Cup? That figure, the government ought to be transparent to the people of St. Lucia. Madam President, so if you're going to have tourism marketing, it is then strategic for you to promote, and when the match is on television, the country gets visibility. But there's no point that there is visibility going to Afghanistan, because, Madam President, as you can imagine, it's very, very difficult to get tourists from Afghanistan, for example. When we look at the numbers coming through the tourist board, we don't get many Dutch people as well. I see the Netherlands here as well. We don't have many Australians coming to St. Lucia. So there's no opportunity, Madam President, for us to, there's no point, because Australia is so far away and it takes an entire day to travel. And air connectivity is very, very bad to Australia. The last time I went to Taiwan, which is a lot closer, Madam President, in Asia, it took me an entire day and 3 different connections. So the value, when the government is going to say, and the leader of government business just said it very generally, couldn't go into specifics, because when you look at how much we're spending versus the potential opportunity for tourism growth, it doesn't exist. Sri Lanka, so far away. When you look at your own reports, if you have 100 Sri Lankans, I will buy you lunch for the rest of the year.
Madam President, I first to rise on a point of order. I think...
What's your point of order, Senator?
I'm referring to 37.1. I think my colleague has had a lot of latitude. I stood here and I presented a motion that dealt with VAT exemptions on goods and services, and the substance of the motion is the amendment to allow these exemptions, and I did list. There was a list of goods and services that were listed. While it has to do with the World Cup, I am listening to a lecture on bidding. I am now listening to a lecture on various countries of Asia and tourism. Madam President, I beg to say that the member is grossly violating section 37.1, and I ask that he please make his presentation relevant to the motion, which is a VAT exemption on goods and services for the most of which is for the ICC World Cup.
Thank you. Senators, I would like some silencing, please. Senator Gibeon, noting your intervention here. However, I did note that Senator Fede, in his introduction, listed some of the countries that would be participating here in St. Lucia, and in that order, he was making the point about the number of persons who would be supporting such teams. So how much money would be gained from this vis-a-vis the VAT, etc. So I allowed Senator Fede some latitude to make his contribution. However, may I say, Senator Fede, I want you to get back on track and speak to the motion, which is the VAT exemptions for the items, the 13 items as it pertains to Cricket World Cup. Okay? Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, you could understand how difficult it is to comment on a motion that comes to the House seeking, I don't know how much it's costing in the VAT exemptions, but I know that we are spending 80 million on the practice facilities, and I don't know what other cost. Madam President, if I were the IMF, they would refer to all the VAT waivers we're giving here. They would call these foregone revenue. We even have VAT on the supply of accommodation. Those are being waived as well, which is much needed revenue that goes into the Treasury. Now, it's being done. It's being done. But Madam President, we cannot debate this in isolation of the grand event which we're hosting in St. Lucia next week. All of this is in preparation not to, June 15th. I'm sorry, we're in the month of April. Thanks for the correction. But all of this, Madam President, the stationery, the signage, catering supplies, cleaning supplies, security services, all of that, Madam President, all of that is for the hosting of the World Cup. And I don't understand why the government is not proud to say that, look, we believe that we have made a good decision. We're giving away all of these taxes. We are willing that we can spend $80 million because we believe we're getting good value. And the World Cup that we're hosting, because the leader of government business actually said very vaguely that all of us know the benefits to hosting the World Cup. And so I have to comment, Madam President, on the benefits to hosting the World Cup because he said it. So in commenting on what he proposed to the House, the benefits in hosting the World Cup, it was strongly implied by the leader of government business that the benefits are great. And I'm saying to him, I disagree with him because the benefits are not so great. We don't have the England team in our group, and by not having the England team, the television promotion that is so valuable to you is not there. There's no point beaming to 1 million people in Afghanistan. There's no point beaming to 1 million people in Sri Lanka. It really doesn't make any sense. I am just saying to you that even if all the entire Sri Lanka population views the match, it is of no value to St. Lucia because we don't have flights going to Sri Lanka, we don't have flights going to Australia, we don't have flights going to the Netherlands, and we get very little tourism. Look at your own tourism report that you have just submitted. You will see there's no Afghanistan coming up. There's no Dutch coming to the island. If you get 200 Dutch people coming a year, you get a lot. So I mean, all we're saying is that this initiative, we want to know the total cost. If there was a dollar value for the VAT exemption being waived here today, that would have been very, very helpful. Now, stimulating the local economy and economic activity, because I want to preempt the leader of government business. I am not sure, Madam President, that this is going to be a great stimulant of economic activity because of the quality of the matches that we have got in St. Lucia. We've got one West Indies game, but West Indies is playing Afghanistan, and that's going to draw a crowd. And I really want to use this forum to encourage everybody to go support the West Indies. That would be great. But we have seen in 2007, there has been, and the leader of government business, I know he's a very avid cricket fan, and he knows what I'm saying. There has been a very dismal attendance of the matches in St. Lucia back in 2007. They were poorly attended, Madam President. And so the Caribbean did a study to 2007 World Cup we hosted. 1 day international, 50 limited over. But it doesn't matter. It's the same 1 day format. So there was a dismal attendance of the 2007 World Cup. And I know the leader of government business wants to make a differentiation between a 20 over and a 50 over.
What is your point of order? Senator Fede.
Madam President, again, the Senator...
Hold on, Senator Fede.
In his attempt to move away from the central argument here, has now moved outside of just accommodation, and he's misleading, grossly misleading this House with the context that he's creating. He's using a 2007 World Cup that was a 50 over tournament that does not have the following of a T20. We are hosting now I don't want to get into the World Cup thing, Madam President, but I must make that distinction again to ask you to ask the member to not try to mislead the House and change the argument from a VAT exemption to a discussion about how many people attend where. It is clear that we are hosting a T20 World Cup, and the T20 is a completely different dynamic to a test match or a 50 over World Cup. So in his attempts to move away from the argument, he's now saying that because 2007 there may have been issues with attendance for 50 over cricket that most people have moved away from and are now into T20. T20 World Cup is guaranteed to create much bigger crowds. So his argument, what he's doing, Madam President, is misleading. Now the average person may not know it, but as a cricket, as he correctly said, he and I both know that what he's saying there is untrue. And it must be noted, Madam President.
Thank you very much for this intervention, Senator, Leader of Government Business. Senator Fede, I am noting the information that has been provided by Senator Gibeon, a complete different scenario that you're presenting, and I ask you to please stick to the motion before us and please provide information that might be truthful. If you were speaking of a T20 situation, comparing 2007 T20 versus 2024 T20, fine. But I am taking note of what he has shared very, very seriously. So proceed and stick to the motion before us.
Well, at no time did I suggest that the 2007 World Cup and the 2024 World Cup were the same thing. Cricket fans do differ. If you ask me who's the greatest batsman in the world, you will have your own opinion. So we do differ in terms of the following that Afghanistan and Sri Lanka and the Netherlands will attract. If you want to believe
Senator Fede, I beg to now interject again. I think this is repetition, and standing orders did speak specifically to that. You have been harping this point, don't but here, you have been harping this point about Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Holland. I ask you to move on.
Madam President, I cannot move on without defending myself. The member has suggested that I am misleading the House, that I'm lying, and I am using the wrong information. That's a very serious allegation, and I cannot allow that to stand on the record.
He indicated that the comparison being made between a T20 and a one-day international, that was what he was saying, that you did not clarify. You gave the impression that they were almost the same. That is what he was speaking to. Okay? So
I did clarify.
Okay, so if you want to clarify that, do that and move on. But you're repeating the same Sri Lanka, Afghanistan situation. You have been on this for a bit. So move on.
So, Madam President, so now I'm being controlled. If the government side doesn't like what I say, then I'm being constrained in terms of what to say. You come to the House to get a bill done to host the World Cup, and you do not want us to talk about the World Cup. Is that what democracy is about? I don't understand that, Madam President. Anyways, moving on. So the hosting of this World Cup, Madam President, and I know that I see that they have come to get, there's a VAT waiver on the security services for the World Cup. And subsection B, Roman numerals 13 of the legislation speaks to a supply of security services. And I want to dwell there for a moment. We're doing this, Madam President, the World Cup, and hosting it and inviting foreigners to come to this great paradise of ours at a time of an unprecedented level of crime. And I know that the government side would not like to hear this because they want to debate this motion based on in isolation, as if this motion does not exist in a wider context of a St. Lucian reality that is taking place in this country. So the motion, Roman numerals 13, speaks to security services. Madam President, the tourists to this country are being robbed flagrantly. Just recently, there was coverage of a couple in the privacy of their car in one of our island's beaches. And they were robbed at gunpoint, Madam President, reported in Loop News. There are 30 homicides, Madam President, as we speak, year to date. So we do obviously have a security problem in the country. And we are now choosing to host the World Cup at this time. And I want to use this forum to caution the government and to appeal to the government to make sure that all of the security arrangements are in place. I do so against the backdrop that you're hosting several international teams, and I'm sorry to go back to Sri Lanka, and I'm sorry to go back to West Indies and Afghanistan and Australia. Australia, Madam President, where you've got some of the superstars of the world. However, Madam President, if something should happen to any of the players, the level of publicity, the backlash will be such, Madam President, that it can affect us and our reputation internationally. And so, Madam President, it is indeed a great concern to me. While I'm an avid supporter of this World Cup, and I love the fact that we're hosting it, I must appeal to the government to make sure that the security arrangements are right. The reason why I do so, Madam President, is because I'm very concerned about timelines. Concerned about timelines because the World Cup is in June 15th, the first game, Australia versus Scotland. And if Australia versus Scotland is playing on the 15th of June, it then asks me, why is the government so late in coming to Parliament to get financing, which is a few weeks ago, to upgrade the main stadium where we're hosting the facility and to organize the practice facility. Not so long ago, the government came to get a loan of $80 million. And so why so late? You knew that you had this World Cup years ago. Why didn't the government, and I'm glad you raised the word contractor. I'm glad you raised the word contractor. Why is the government so late in getting the necessary things done in order for us to get this organized? That's an important question. The World Cup was there. We knew that we had to host this years ago. Why is it that you are taking so long, through you, Madam President, to come and do what is necessary to get the thing? I mean, I am being told it's a mad rush to get, they're scampering last minute. In fact, Madam President, while we were debating the loan for the practice facility to get the financing, work was already being done at the Mindy Phillip Park. So you had things that were being done in a mad rush, helter-skelter. It just gives me the impression that this whole process is not managed well. That is my opinion. That is my opinion. I know that in this house, we have problems with people expressing the opinion when we don't agree with them. Yeah? But it is very unfortunate that the government is not willing to defend its own position. I mean, there are 4 of you on the other side. 4 governments, 5 today. You all have a lot of time to come and to debunk whatever you want to debunk. That's how we operate. We believe in the freedom of speech on this side. We believe that people should have the opportunity to speak. But you want me to debate a bill in isolation like there's not a reality. So while we do support this World Cup, Madam President, and the hosting of it, we are concerned by how it's managed, by how the government is implementing certain aspects of the World Cup. Madam President, the motion before us seeks to reduce the VAT rate, or to, waive VAT on a number of items. Supply of stationery signage, a whole host of things, telecommunication, all kinds of stuff, laundry services, cleaning supplies, catering services. That is great. But I want to say to the government this, that as we do this, the people of St. Lucia are suffering with high prices, and the government can do something about giving them a reduction in the VAT rate on many commodities which are carrying up the cost of living in this country. But of course, Madam President, the government will not want to hear that. The same level of gusto and energy and vitality with which you come to this house, I believe that in this time of high cost of living, just like the ICC and Cricket West Indies, the people of St. Lucia too needs a VAT break so that they can have cheaper prices in the supermarket. And so, Madam President, you go to the supermarket and groceries are very, very high. You go to the gas station and gas is very, very high. You go to other places of commerce and trade, and things are very, very expensive in this country. So we can come to the Parliament, we can give the ICC and West Indies Cricket Board a VAT waiver, but nothing for the people of St. Lucia with any energy so that we can take care of their prices too. What the ICC, by requesting these, what the ICC is saying to you is what the people of St. Lucia has been saying all along. The ICC says that, look, in order for us to reduce our cost, while we are here in St. Lucia to operate, we're asking you to waive the VAT rate on all of these things, on stationery, on signage, on all of the whole list of the items that they've asked you to waive it on. And so by making sure that they can come and do this as cost effectively, that whatever aspect of the hosting of the World Cup that they're responsible for, they're saying, look, we need a VAT break. The people of St. Lucia too need a VAT break. The people of St. Lucia too are facing high prices. Like the ICC and the West Indies Cricket Board, the people of St. Lucia too needs a break. The people of St. Lucia too are fed up with the high prices that we face in the supermarket.
Senator Fede, we have 15 minutes to complete your presentation.
And so, Madam President, I want to leave no illusion in this House. We are not against the hosting of the World Cup. We are not against the motion that is asking for these breaks. But what we're saying is that as the ICC and the West Indies Cricket Board have recognized, we want to make sure that the government do right by the people too. We want to make sure that the government be transparent with the full cost. And I'm looking forward that when the leader of government business in his rebuttal is to tell us what is the full cost of the World Cup. And we want to make sure, Madam President, that the security arrangements are in place, given the high rates of crime that we face in the country. I thank you.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm quite happy, Madam President, that the opposition has given me quite a lot of content. My rebuttal is always based on the extent of the opposition's contribution. And I try not to stray away from anything or introduce too many new issues into my response. And while we stood a couple times on a point of order and elucidation, to the benefit of the member, he continued to provide me with content. And so I thank him for that, and I remind him and the opposition that when we come here with a motion or a bill, my first duty is to present it as it is, to explain it, and the opposition has a right to respond. And while the member complained about almost suggesting that we wanted him to say what we wanted him to say, this side has never said that the opposition has lost their right to speak. We have never said that. But I recall when I sat in opposition, and he was then in government, we were told that we had lost our right to speak. But we shall not say that. So I encourage the opposition to use their right to speak.
Madam President, I stand on a point of order. The member is misleading the House.
Hold a second. I need to ask you, what is your point of order before you proceed? What is your point of order?
Yeah, so he says that, what he said is that while he was in opposition and we were in government, that we told the senators that they have lost the right to speak. That was never said. Find the evidence, bring the Hansard before you can allow that comment to stand.
Did he specifically say that it happened in this House, in the Senate or in the House?
He said that while he was in opposition, he was never an MP. Was he ever an MP? He's never won a seat.
Please proceed, Senator.
Madam President, now that the senator has lost a seat, he knows how it feels. Madam President, I repeat what I said, and I'm making a point in the process. We believe that there is an opposition, and an opposition comprises of both upper and lower chambers, and the opposition in this chamber has a right to speak. While they may not agree with what we say, that's okay. I said, and I'll repeat, that while in opposition, the fact that he is sitting in the Senate doesn't mean that he's not in opposition. While in opposition, I, as an opposition member, I repeat, the opposition, his government then said that the opposition has lost their right to speak. Now, if he wants to confine it to the Senate, that's his business. But let me move on. Madam President,
the member is repeating an untruth. My government never said that. On the point of order, he's misleading the House. My government never said that the opposition has lost its right to speak.
Senator Fede, I will allow the senator to move on, and let's leave this point alone.
Madam President, I will move on. Unless the then Prime Minister was not a member of government, then I don't understand. Anyhow, he knows very well, Madam President, that his then Prime Minister said it. But I do not want to spend my entire presentation on something that the whole world knows was said in public with recordings everywhere. So, Madam President, this motion was to exempt VAT on specific goods and services for a specific period of time for a specific event. But when you listen to the opposition's argument, you would believe that this government has come to waive VAT on everything, forever and ever. And so, since the member could not find a legitimate argument to oppose the removal of VAT to facilitate an international event that he will benefit from, that I will benefit from, that St. Lucians will benefit from. He tries to take the argument all over the world. And so, he went about talking about the bidding process. Then he went about the 80 million. He couldn't stop saying 80 million, 80 million, 80 million. You know, that's what happened when his opposition, they repeat the thing, and they repeat it, and they hope it sticks. I want to remind this Senate, Madam President, that while St. Lucia, as one of the territories, came to get an $80 million loan, other territories have borrowed up to $300 million. I did say that the last time, and I'm saying it again. So in the context, given the St. Lucia's role in the World Cup, the countries that we're hosting, the stages that we're hosting, that he explained, first round and Super 8, what we are doing is in no way comparable to what our other neighbors are doing. So, Madam President, he admitted that the use of the money is to be spent on practice facilities, and reminded us that when he was a little boy, it happened in Grosley. So then he came back at the end and pretended that he doesn't know what the money is. What is the money being used for? So I see the conflict. And again, Madam President, you gave him latitude. They complain that they're not getting a chance to speak, but I never got that kind of latitude when I was in opposition. I sat over there. I could say some of those things. But, and I think Senator Jawahir spent some time with me in opposition, we never got that kind of latitude, you know. So, but it speaks about the way this Labour Party governs. So, Madam President, he went on to try to raise an argument about which countries we're hosting. And almost papi showing Afghanistan, you know. Where's Afghanistan and Sri Lanka? How many people? 1 million people? You know, that the opposition must always remember that in the quest to undermine what the government is doing, they have to watch what they say about other people, other nations. People listen to what we say about them. These same people, I hope when he goes to watch the game with his free ticket, and he meets the Sri Lankans, and he meets the Afghanistan players and their coaches and their managers, and he goes to pose with them for photographs, he could remind them of what he said about them in an official capacity as a senator in the Senate. We have to watch the way we refer to other people and people's nations. They're sovereign states. They're proud. They have qualified for the World Cup. They have beaten other countries and they are here. So just because they come from Asia and there are no direct flights and they happen to be in the Caribbean where everybody wants to come to, even if they don't want to watch the cricket, they want to come to the Caribbean just for the experience. Then what? And so, Madam President, he stressed on these countries. But for some reason, Madam President, he refused to talk about Australia. 26 million people, population of Australia. Madam President, as an astute cricket fan, and I hope he is, if you can't get to host England, your next best bet is to host India because of their following and their prowess in world cricket. And if you can't get England and India, then your next best bet is Australia. So, Madam President, and Scotland is part of the UK, where we have direct flights. Madam President, I'll tell you something. You see, I'll tell you something.
I'm sorry, Madam President. The member is misleading the House again.
Senator, what is your point of order?
I just told you, he's misleading the House. Madam President, for the member to say that Scotland, which is way in the north of England, we don't have a flight in Manchester. Our flights are coming from the deep south of Gatwick. There's no flight connectivity from the major airports of Glasgow, nor the other Edinburgh. There's no flight connection. You're talking about a 5 hours drive. Remember, you're living in a dream world.
Senator Fede, you stood up on a point of order and to tell the senator that he's living in a dream world. Senator Fede, I shall please ask you to withdraw this last statement.
I do apologize for the dream world statement, but the point still stands. He's misleading the House.
And I shall not be asking you again to ensure that your language in this House is always honorable. Let's move on.
Madam President, I will not be dragged into a debate about where flights come from or the geography of travel. We know we were criticized for not having England, and now I mentioned Scotland is part of Europe. Maybe we don't have the direct flights from Scotland, but it sounds as if Scottish people can't come to St. Lucia. That's it. And then I'm called, Madam President, let's move on. Madam President, I was saying, when you have a bid, and I didn't want to go in, because this is a VAT motion, but you see, when they open the door, I have to make sure that St. Lucians are not made to think that we're living in any dream world. Madam President, every country in the Caribbean, whether it is Test cricket, one-day internationals, or T20s, when we have visiting teams, everybody wants England. We know why. And in fact, the biggest benefit of hosting England is when you have a test match. Because they have like the likes of Miami and all of those who stay for a longer period of time. Now, I did see.
Again, Madam President, the member is misleading he's misleading the House. That is not true.
Senator Fede, when you stand, you indicate to me that you stand on a point of order. I have to ask you, what is your point of order? You take on the House like you're in charge. Senator Fede, take your seat until such time that you learn how to address yourself in this House.
Madam President, I stand on a point of order.
Take your seat and then you will start over.
I stand on the point of order, Madam
What is your point of order, Senator Fede?
Madam President, this is a democratically constituted Senate. I'm sorry, with all due respect, I am not a school child. We have to address each other with mutual respect. And so I really do not appreciate you shouting at me. But what I'll say to you, no, I don't. I don't. However, I'll say that I stand on a point of order. And my point of order, the member is misleading the House.
I have asked you to indicate what is your point of order.
To suggest that that England only follows a test match is inaccurate.
Madam President,
to suggest
I rise
that the
on a point
Barmy
of
Army
order.
and to have England for a test match is inaccurate. We have seen that the country which has hosted England, St. Lucia, during the limited overs World Cup of 2007, and there was a reason why they did it, we saw thousands, hundreds of Barmy Army fans coming to St. Lucia. Let the member speak the truth.
Senators, there shall not be a back and forth on this matter anymore. It seems like these are opinions, are not facts. We cannot prove who or how many follow the English team or the Australian team. It makes no point we're going back and forth. So we shall not have an interruption again. Proceed, Senator Gideon.
Madam President, I agree and I move on because we're not getting anywhere. This is not what the motion is about. Here is the argument that I raise. Not having been able to secure certain countries as a host, we have Australia, and Australia with 26 million people and probably the second or third most powerful nation in world cricket brings a certain level of presence to our country. Madam President, the member then attempted to bring in the crime situation, as they always do, with regard to the security services. Security services is a part of every major world event. And I noticed at that point he suddenly remembered Australia, because he was talking about Afghanistan and Sri Lanka and Scotland as if, there are no bodies coming here. But then when it came to security services, when it was convenient to raise the importance of the Australian team in St. Lucia, oh, but you must have adequate security because they are stars. Well, let me just thank him for reminding St. Lucians that we bring in stars to St. Lucia. Stars from Australia and stars from other countries. Afghanistan has stars too, you know. They have the number one all-rounder in cricket now. He's from Afghanistan. So, you see, the convenience of the argument is the problem. And that is why I attempted to clarify. So, St. Lucia coming to this, the government coming to this house to seek the exemptions for the purpose of the World Cup is because we recognize the magnitude of this event that brings stars, as he said, to St. Lucia. And so we have to make sure that we allow for the services and goods that are related to the event to get the exemptions. And now, when that did not work, he tries to pretend that it's about the 80 million and the St. Lucia is spending too much money and St. Lucians need a break on VAT as well. I want to remind the Senate that the benefits of the World Cup, and I was going to say something in response to that, but since he's not here, I will leave that alone. I really wanted to respond to the issue of who needs a break from the VAT that he mentioned. But he has left, so let me leave that alone. There'll be other opportunities to respond. So, Madam President, when we have given exemptions to the entities that will provide the goods and the services associated with the World Cup, we know that it will inevitably and eventually benefit the vendor, the taxi driver, the tour operator, the hotel worker, the farmer, the music people, the entertainers, all of the people who are part of events and benefit from events in this country during the time that we host the event. So to try to suggest that an exemption is only benefiting the people who are importing stuff, when the event is hosted here, it's going to be from June to the end of July, an entire month. We, in fact, almost more than an entire month. We in St. Lucia, for the time that we are hosting these games, and he did mention the Super 8 games, we may very well have two big teams playing if Australia makes it to the Super 8, which they always do. And we wouldn't even be able to know which teams will probably join Australia to play here. So there is a huge opportunity for this country. And no matter what the opposition tries to do, try to deflect the argument, take it away from the VAT and bring it around crime and bring it around which country has what, and all kinds of machinations to try to derail the argument. We stand firm on the conviction as a government that making these moves, giving these exemptions, will redound to the benefit of the average St. Lucia in this country. And so, I thank the members who have contributed, and I look forward to the benefits that go into the pockets of the people of the St. Lucia while we host the World Cup. And the VAT exemptions that we give here, whatever revenue is foregone, the government stands to benefit tremendously from the revenues that we will gain by hosting the 2024 T20, not One Day International, T20 ICC World Cup. I thank you, Madam President.
Senators, the question is that Parliament, by affirmative resolution, approves the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 2 order, which amends Schedule 2 of the Act. A, in Item 1, to include the following new definitions. Cricket West Indies means Cricket West Indies, Inc., a company incorporated under the laws of the British Virgin Islands. International Cricket Council means the International Cricket Council, a company limited by guarantee and incorporated in the British Virgin Islands. International Business Corporation means ICC Business Corporation FC LLC, a company incorporated under the regulations of the Dubai Development Authority. B, to include as an exempt supply for a period commencing from the first day of April 2024 and ending on the 31st day of July 2024, a supply to Cricket West Indies and the International Cricket Council, its subsidiaries and associates, including the International Business Corporation for Cricket World Cup 2024, of the following goods and services. 1. A supply of stationery. 2. A supply of signage. 3. Supply of promotional materials, including flyers and clothing. 4. A supply of local transportation of cargo. 5. A supply of routers and walkie-talkies. 6. A supply of printing supplies. 7. A supply of hardware and building supplies. 8. A supply of accommodation. 9. A supply of telecommunication services. 10. A supply of laundry services. 11. A supply of cleaning services. 12. A supply of catering services. 13. A supply of security services. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I beg to present the following motion standing in my name. Whereas under Section 1091 of the Value Added Tax Act, Cap 1542, the Act, it is provided that the Minister of Finance may, by order published in the Gazette, amend the schedules of the Act. And whereas it is further provided under Section 1092 of the Act that an order made pursuant to the Section 1091 of the Act is subject to an affirmative resolution of Parliament, except where the amendment is to the customs tariffs headings only. And whereas the Minister of Finance seeks approval of the draft value added tax amendment of Schedule 3, number 2, order to amend Schedule 3 of the Act by an affirmative resolution of Parliament to include, as an exempt item, the imports of goods and services by the Abu Dhabi Future Energy Company, PJSC, Mazda, for the development, building, and commissioning of a solar photovoltaic carport and solar street lights at the project site located at the Huranura International Airport. Be it resolved that Parliament, by affirmative resolution, approves the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 3 order, which amends Schedule 3 of the Act to include, as an exempt import, the imports of goods and services by the Abu Dhabi Future Energy Company, PJSC, Mazda, for the development, building, and commissioning of the solar photovoltaic carport and solar street lights at the project site located at the Huranura International Airport. Madam President, just briefly, this is essentially in keeping with our policy, the government's policy of transitioning into more efficient, energy-efficient operations with regard to our lighting, and that would include the site referenced in this motion, which is the Huranura International Airport site. And of course, in doing so, bringing in those more energy-efficient lights, we are definitely reducing our carbon footprint, and that would be good news for those of us who are very committed to achieving our sustainable development goals and commitments by our country. So I welcome this, and I ask that members do support that resolution in that regard. Thank you.
Senators, the question is that Parliament, by affirmative resolution, approves the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 3 order, which amends Schedule 3 of the Act to include, as an exempt import, the import of goods and services by the Abu Dhabi Future Energy Company, PJSC, Mazda, for the development, building, and commissioning of a solar photovoltaic carport and solar street lights at the project site located at the Huranura International Airport. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Madam President. I actually just have a few questions, and I'm hoping that the Leader of Government Business can address in his rebuttal. First of all, it would be interesting for us to find out a little bit more about the company that's undertaking the project. There's nothing given to us with regard to this company. It's what it does, what it has done, its capacity, and perhaps even more importantly, what the expected outcomes from this project are. How big is it going to be? What is the output that's expected from the site once it is fully commissioned? Is that going to feed into the grid, or is it going to feed just the airport, for example? What is the intention for the site? So just a little bit more information. I think background information is necessary for us to have a full understanding of what this project is and what it is for, and perhaps again, more importantly, what we are foregoing in agreeing to have it as an exempt project or an exempt entity. Thank you.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President, and thank you to the member. The company being referenced is a reputable organization, and that is why before we go ahead and do any business, knowing the magnitude of that project, that we have to ensure that we do our due diligence on these. The energy-based company, Abu Dhabi Future Energy Company, Inc., and sometimes when the services that you require are not readily available locally, you then look to procure services abroad. So that particular initiative, there are two components there, as I mentioned. One of them is the photovoltaic carport and street lights. Now, I do not want the senator to mix that one up with a previous street lighting situation that was a major discussion topic in the previous government. These two things are in no way connected. So if he, at any point, his mind wandered in that direction, I want him to disabuse himself of that. Clearly it's not. But it's essentially making sure that the company in question is reputable, due diligence having been done, and that in some cases we have to import the services of these organizations to ensure that they meet the standards that we require. We also have a very important responsibility, having signed on to so many of these sustainable development, SDG, climate change documents and agreements, COP and all of them. My colleague who must have been at the last one will tell you, these organizations, their mandate extends across government sectors. So it's not only the Ministry of Sustainable Development. Right now in tourism, we have a new thrust towards what we call sustainable tourism. So whereas in the past, you would just perhaps give approval for a cruise line to just come in using regular fossil fuels. Now there are certain requirements for your port to be able to do that. Now the Uwanora International Airport is an airport, it's not a seaport. So the very same expectations we have with the seaports are now being expected with the airports. We cannot control the jet fuel emissions, but our use of materials, our procurement of certain services, there is a mandate for us to ensure that they include the type of service that the Abu Dhabi company provides. I may not be able to give you much information about their contractual arrangements and so on, but what I can assure you is that the due diligence on that company was done, and because of their reputation in that type of work, particularly with regard to photovoltaic equipment and lighting, the government is comfortable that they will be able to deliver those services. So I trust that it happens and that we see an improvement in our ability to deliver on our sustainable development obligations. Thank you.
Senators, the question is that Parliament, by affirmative resolution, approves the draft value-added tax amendment of Schedule 3 order, which amends Schedule 3 of the Act to include as an exempt import the import of goods and services by the Abu Dhabi Future Energy Company, PJSC, Mazda, for the development, building, and commissioning of a solar photovoltaic carport and solar streetlights at the project site located at the Hewanorra International Airport. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that the Senate stands adjourned, sine die.
Honorable members and senators, the question is that the House do stand adjourned sine die. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Sitting adjourned.
We have just come to the end, the conclusion of today's sitting of the Senate. Today, Thursday, April 8th, 2024, where we saw the approval of 3 motions. One of the motions dealt with the establishment of a regulated fund for cannabis. The second motion dealt with, the second and third motions dealt with the exemption of VAT on certain items relating to Cricket World Cup. I just briefly want to summarize the debates that arose concerning the establishment of the fund. That was the first motion, and member of the opposition, Dr. Paul Hughes, she had some queries concerning who would be administering the fund, because according to the motion, the accounting officer to minister the fund would be the permanent secretary, and her query was that the accounting officer who would be administering the fund was also the one earmarked to do the audit, and in his rebuttal, Senator Daniel on the government side made the clarification that in every ministry, the accounting officer really is the permanent secretary, and that there were accounting staff, if you will, and she would not necessarily be the one directly doing the auditing. And he also spoke about the Auditor General, who is sort of like a final head of all accounting practices. The other motion that generated a lot of debate concerned the Cricket World Cup and exemptions to certain goods and services. And the leader of opposition business, Mr. Dominic Feby, was speaking around the motion, talking about the amount of money that was borrowed for renovations on certain sporting facilities, and he felt that the government wasn't necessarily going to get value from some of the gains that were allotted on our schedule in St. Lucia. And we saw there was a lot of interruptions and interjections during his contribution, because he was being told that he was not speaking on the motion itself, which really had to do with the exemption of VAT on certain items relating to Cricket World Cup. And after this back and forth, the leader of opposition business, he left abruptly. It is something that we have seen in the House before, On the third motion, finally, Michael, you wanted to speak on the third motion really had to do with also exemption, but this time for a company, exemption for foreign company to get VAT exempted items for lighting equipment and other photovoltaic items on Hiwanura Airport. The independent senator, Senator Lee, he queried about the company which was selected, to do this project. And in his rebuttal, the leader of government business said that, the company was skilled in that kind of work, and that the government, he told the senator, rest assured that the government had done its due diligence in securing this company to undertake such work. Michael?
Oui, merci un peu, Virgil. Quand nous avons Sénat là, j'ai bout et bien fini aujourd'hui. Après 3 différentes motions étaient présentées en Caille Conseil. Première motion, c'était pour aider, pour le gouvernement passer, regardez exactement ça y est. Première motion, c'était pour supporter, ça c'est, oui, ça nous a créé anglais, regulated substance, pour établir le fonds, pour régler, ça nous a dit c'est bail contre drogue avec bagaille comme ça. Et qui tenait un petit discussion bien. Ma pas même vécu débat, particulièrement entre ça c'est chef face à l'opposition, et ça c'est on est Dominique Fédé, avec aussi nous étions sénateur Ferropolis parler à celui aussi. Mais quand Virgil finit de nous, ça qui était plus intéressant, et bien qui tienne, c'est ni plus discussion aujourd'hui. C'était, m'avait dit aller casser, mais c'est presque comme ça, aller casser entre, ça c'est Dominique, c'est chef face à l'opposition, sénateur Dominique Fédé, et puis ça c'est chef face à gouvernement, à sous discussion, ça c'est côté gouvernement qui a essayé tirer VAT à sous plusieurs différents bagailles pour ces go jouer cricket là qui a été en juin. Avec ça, maintenant, j'ai allé casser J4 chef face à l'opposition, c'est sénateur Dominique Fédé, par équité Kaila, puisque ça c'est président, ça c'est madame président Sénat là, tenu pour doubler, ça pour faire mettre en wig. Vous savez, conseil gouvernemental mettez un wig pour doubler ça faire aller casser. Président dit il était déjà c'est ça. Avec il voulait discussion continue à l'instant il parti. Avec dernière motion, c'était qu'on dit c'est pour bailler en compagnie sortir un pays Abu Dhabi que pour mettre un système clarté et bien système courant en aéroport Hiwanura avec mais ça c'est système qui n'a pas tellement servi courant électrique normal, mais c'est plutôt ça un système courant par soleil avec indépendant sénateur indépendant qui parlait pour la première fois aujourd'hui. Il dit qu'il voulait subsiding plus à sous compagnie avec sénateur Ferdinand répondre. Eh bien, il était intéressant aujourd'hui, même nous pas quoi il a duré autant, mais c'est comme ça qu'il y a quand même
avec Senate is always more exciting, I suppose.
Mais particulièrement après, même ces motions ça discuté en caille consiste mardi avec qui partenait autant de discussions. Alors il était bien intéressant. Avec Virgil ça nous c'est nous avons chaise un pile chaise. J'ai plus chaise, moi ça vous observer la plus chaise à présent pour préparer pour ça c'est ça qui a créé throne speech ça c'est parole gouverneur c'est les gouverneurs qui joignent et puis ni tous les départements là en présentation ça c'est l'adresse là maintenant c'est pas là encore c'est ouais ok mais c'est qui est présenté par le gouverneur général la mardi si Dieu veut avec nous vieux ici pour nous présenter.
On Tuesday we will be back here. So thank you so much for joining us on behalf of our team, on behalf of the technicians, the cameramen and all. I am Rachel Leonti.
Michael Gaspard, qui dit merci en pile avec nous qui vieux maintenant en studio nous pour plus à ce qui a passé en gouvernement Saint-Lucie.